Welcome. If you are stepping into the world of quantum mechanics, you are leaving behind a world where things have definite, precise places. In classical physics, describing a particle is intuitive. You give me 3 coordinates for its position and 3 for its momentum. But nature at the atomic scale does not play by these rules. An electron does not sit at a single coordinate. It exists in a cloud of probabilities, a superposition of multiple states at once. To describe this reality, physics relies on a massive, elegant mathematical framework, linear algebra. Think of linear algebra not just as a tool for solving equations, but as the underlying architecture of the quantum world. Today, in Part 1, we explore the playground, the mathematical spaces where quantum states live, and how we rewrite standard math into the beautiful shorthand of quantum mechanics. Let's look at where everything takes place, the vector space. In mathematics, a vector space is a collection of objects, vectors, that obey 2 strict rules when you mix them together: linearity and closure. Closure under addition. If you take 2 vectors from your space and add them together, the result must still be a vector inside that exact same space. Closure under scalar multiplication. If you take a vector and multiply it by a number, stretching it, shrinking it, or flipping its direction, it must remain in the space. In quantum mechanics, these scalars are almost always complex numbers, which include the imaginary unit, I. We care deeply about these rules because of the superposition principle. If state A is a valid physical state of a quantum system, and state B is also a valid state, then any linear combination, like 2A plus 3B, must also be a perfectly valid physical state. This is only mathematically guaranteed if our states live inside a formal vector space. A subspace is simply a smaller vector space nested inside a larger one that still obeys these rules on its own. Imagine a whole 3D room as your vector space. A flat sheet of paper passing through the origin is a 2D subspace. If you stay on that paper, you can add and scale vectors all day, and you will never leave it. Linear independence, basis, and dimension. To navigate any vector space, you need a reference frame. You need a basis. Think of a basis as the minimal set of building blocks required to construct every single vector in the space. To be a true basis, the vectors in this set must satisfy 2 conditions. They must span the space, and they must be linearly independent. Linearly independent means none of the vectors in your basis can be made by combining the others. They are completely unique directions. On a standard 2D graph, the x-axis and the y-axis are independent. You can march along the x-axis forever, and you will never gain any altitude in the y direction. The number of vectors you need in this minimal set defines the dimension of your space. A 2D plane has a dimension of 2 because it needs 2 basis vectors. In quantum mechanics, the dimension of your space tells you how many distinct, independent outcomes or states your system can possess. For a simple quantum coin, like the spin of an electron, the space is 2-dimensional. It can be spin up or spin down. The basis vectors are just up and down, and every other state is a mix of the 2. For a particle moving freely across a room, the number of independent positions is infinite, meaning our vector space expands to an infinite-dimensional space. The inner product. So far, our vector space is just a barren grid. We can add and stretch vectors, but we don't know how long they are or what the angle between 2 states is. To fix this, we introduce the inner product, a generalized version of the geometric dot product. An inner product takes 2 vectors, combines them, and spits out a single scalar. This gives our space a geometry, allowing us to calculate the length, or norm, of a vector by taking the inner product of a vector with itself. The real magic happens when the inner product of 2 different, non-zero vectors equals exactly 0. When this happens, the vectors are orthogonal, at a 90-degree angle to one another. In quantum mechanics, orthogonality means 2 states are mutually exclusive. If an electron is definitively in state A, and state B is orthogonal to state A, the probability of measuring the electron in state B is exactly 0. When we choose a basis where every vector has a length of 1, is normalized, and every vector is orthogonal to every other vector, we call it an orthonormal basis. This is the gold standard in quantum mechanics, making calculations incredibly clean. Now that we understand the playground, let's look at the language. In 1939, physicist Paul Dirac introduced an elegant shorthand that changed everything: bracket notation. Instead of writing a column vector, Dirac put the state vector inside a right-facing bracket called a ket, written as ket psi. The symbol inside is just a label. If our system is an electron with spin up, we write up arrow. To take an inner product, we need a matching partner for our column vector. We take our column vector, flip it horizontally into a row vector, and take the complex conjugate of its elements. Dirac represented this new row vector as a left-facing bracket called a bra, written as bra phi. When you compute the inner product of the state ket psi and the state bra phi, you place the bra next to the ket, forming a complete closed bracket, a bracket phi psi. This bracket yields a single complex number, known as a probability amplitude. If you want to know the actual physical probability that a quantum system in state bra psi will collapse into state bra phi during a measurement, you simply take the absolute square of this bracket. With this simple notation, Dirac unified the geometry of vector spaces with the predictive machinery of quantum physics. You now know the playground. We have vector spaces where quantum states live, an inner product to measure how states overlap, and Dirac notation to write it all down beautifully. But right now, our states are just sitting there. What happens when a physical system changes over time, or when we actively perform a measurement on it? To see how states move, change, and transform, we need operators and matrices. That is exactly what we will tackle in Part 2, the action. See you there.